Hey guys, my name is Bailey and I'm an artist. Today I want to show you how to set up a clay render for your models using the daylight system, mental ray, and all inside of 3D Studio Max. There are of course a number of ways to do this, but I kind of like this way, using the photometric lighting, because you get that warm lighting from the sun and you have kind of the blue bounce light from the sky, and of course you have your ambient occlusion. And who doesn't love that? Okay, so let's say you just got your model here, and for my testing purposes, I've got this model I did a while back based on a 2D concept by Jeff McAteer, actually. If you haven't checked him out, you should. Okay, so I didn't do anything here other than just apply a basic material to it. So let's first set up like a background. So I'm just going to hit Alt-W to make this larger, and I'm going to make a plane, geometry, plane, just drag it on out, and I've got a number of segments here because I want to apply a bend to it. So go to the modifiers, bend, bump up this angle, let's see, Y. Yeah, that seems close. So then I'm going to twirl down on the bend just to adjust the direction of this bend. Got the gizmo, got my rotation, and 90 degrees. Looks like it needs to bend the other way. Because what we're doing is making it go from the floor to the wall in one continuous piece. So if we hit limit effect and then adjust this limit and drag that up, maybe like 10. Sure. So they do the same kind of thing in photography. Okay. Now let me move this. Oh, don't do that. Don't be dumb. Okay, let me move this back. And I'm going to hit M to open up the material editor. I'm just going to drag a material onto that. As we can see here, yeah, it fills the frame. So I'm going to do a quick test render by hitting Q. And as we can see, this is just using the default scanline renderer, so it kind of looks like butt. But, pardon, let's do a comparison with our final render. So I like to go up to rendering up here and then open up the RAM player. And this allows us to compare renderings, especially if you're like diagnosing problems. It's really useful. So let's just open up the last rendered image in channel A. Okay. And we're just going to minimize this for now. I'm going to close this render thingamabob. Okay. Now that we've got that, let's create the daylight system. So go up to the create panel and choose systems. Under standard, you'll have daylight. And it's just going to ask you this question about the exposure control. Just hit yes, that's fine. I'm just going to drag it off to the side with this compass thing, and then I'll pull up to create the sun, and then just click when you're done. And now it's working, but we got to change some parameters here by going into the modify panel. Let's make the sunlight mental ray sun, skylight mental ray sky, and it wants to ask us if it can add a sky map. And yes, please do. Okay. Now, let's just expand this by hitting Alt-W. So this is the position of the sun in the sky. Now you can use like date, time, and location and actually set the hour, the latitude, the longitude, and the time of year. But I like to just do it manually. So if you go back to the position, just click manual. Then you can move the sun wherever you want it. Now in order to see what's going on here, I've got just a basic camera set up, and I'm going to turn on realistic, and then lighting, shadows, illuminate with scene lights. Cool. And then I'm also just going to go over to the camera and turn on show safe frames. So this will make it the same size that you have in your render setup under Alt-Q 1280 by 720. Okay, so now if we move the sun around a bit, you can see the shadows changing. Let's bring it down a bit. By the way, if you move this all the way down, actually the colors change a bit, like it's sunlight, like it's going through all that extra air. The light's getting scattered. So something like that seems good. Now for the sky parameter, I have it on haze driven, which I like. And I also changed the shadows to 5. Normally it's 1, so the softness I should say. And what this will do is the further away the shadow hitting a surface is from its source, it kind of blurs out more, and that just makes it look a little nicer. You can mess around with that. Of course, there are a lot of different options you can mess with, but this will be good for now. I'm going to open up the materials by hitting M. And let's create an arc and design material. So click on standard, and then you can type in arc. Oh, we got to change it over to mental ray first. So go up to render setup and go down, assign renderer, mental ray. Cool. And now we can find that arc and design. And I like to turn off reflectivity, but some people like it for these kind of renders. Go down to special effects, turn on ambient occlusion. I'm going to bump these samples up to 32. And the distance, let's just make it huge. 50, sure. The higher this number is, the more ambient occlusion you're going to get, like the more shadows inside of those places where the cracks are. Cool. All right, now let's go over to the environment by hitting 8. You can also find it up in the rendering environment here. And so the one thing I changed here was with the ambient lighting. I made this a slightly saturated blue, but still pretty dark, but kind of a gray. Just kind of makes it a little brighter. Now for the exposure control, let's change this to mental ray photographic exposure control. And there's some presets in here. You can start off with like the daylight, and you can adjust the shutter speed, aperture, all that stuff. And I like to turn down the shadows and kind of bump up the mids, which makes the shadows a little less dark, and you get the idea. You can see this curve here, kind of get a sense of it. And the white point is 6500 Kelvin, which is daylight, right? If you're familiar with like light bulbs and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's pretty cool. And I think that'll give us a pretty good result. One last thing I like to do is go over to rendering, render setup, or Alt Q. And under the, where is it? Global illumination. You can just bump up this shadow quality. Okay. And lastly, let's open up this rendered frame window. And you can adjust the image precision here. Let's crank it a little bit, but not too much. You get diminishing returns. Well, it just depends on what you want. It's going to take more time the higher you crank these things up. I'm going to put the final gather at low. I think that should work. Okay, I'm going to render, but I'm going to pause it so you guys don't have to watch it rendering. And here we go. And we're back. As you can see here, it has finished rendering. Took a few minutes, but only because I had some of these settings up a fair amount. As we can see, it looks pretty decent. Let's give it a comparison with our RAM preview. If we go over to channel B and put this in there, okay, we can actually drag this across to see the difference. Clearly there's a big difference here because the first one was just using default lighting, so it looks like trash. But you can do this to kind of compare, with maybe your more standard mental ray, ambient occlusion, clay render, with this daylight system to see what you like and what you don't. All right, well, that's all, guys, and adios.